I seem to be falling into a habit of making provocative and controversial statements at the beginning of these, so why not continue that trend? I don't really watch TV shows, other than the reality game type, at all. I don't dislike the medium, and I admire all of the great products that have come from it, but I find it very hard to keep myself invested in a storyline that doesn't seem to know where it's going most of the time. Does Breaking Bad look like an intriguing entity that has piqued my interest a couple of different times? Absolutely. The acting that I've seen from the show seems phenomenal, and the different arcs that I've heard retold from my friends' perspectives are refreshing. The problem is, at the end of the day, do I really want to invest myself into 60 episodes worth of content to finish a story when I could use that time to watch 30 different films instead? I just can't come around to pulling the trigger on that. Unless I get a little bit bigger on YouTube, then who knows. What I can say, however, is that I respect the way in which shows are able to reel in millions of people over and over for years and years. Well, except for one specific subgenre. I have an intense disdain for adult animation on television, specifically comedic adult animation. How do I put this? Due to the fact that the medium of animation is often associated with younger audiences, these shows garner an audience of people who act very childlike through mimicking the immature humor on screen. And it's not even enjoyable immaturity, as because these shows know about the aforementioned association, it comes from the shows attempting to shove as much explicit and mature content in your face as possible, to the point where it just circles back around to being immature again. It's like an 11-year-old discovering the F word and its meaning for the first time, and then using it over and over again to the point where it loses all of its potency. Also, I don't know if there's a study on this or anything, but because there's such a connection between animation and childhood, fans of these properties tend to get attached to the characters and always defend the show with the same veracity of those animated shows from their past. It's almost like a placebo for nostalgia that hasn't even become warranted yet. This isn't a situation where I'm speaking on what I don't know either. I've watched the first 3 seasons of Rick and Morty when it was at its peak popularity and toxicity, and I couldn't really stand any of the characters, nor the blatant intellectualism baiting. Everything about Family Guy has been said or memed about by the internet already, so I won't waste my energy on it. My ex convinced me to watch the entirety of The Simpsons together, and through the 7 seasons we got through before we broke up, it just came off as bland. I was put through a lot of South Park by my friends at sleepovers, and although it is undoubtedly the best of the crop I've mentioned, and the social commentary in the early episodes is excellent, it's been rather hit or miss for the past decade or so. And Archer is the most overrated show that I've ever seen. Oh, and for all the insufferable indie kids who won't stop screaming about BoJack Horseman to me through the screen, I haven't seen it, so I'll give into the opinion that it's an exception until I inevitably come around to watching it. So, if anyone is still watching after that, it's not for lack of experience that I've had this opinion. I just haven't seen a show that has that special something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Actually, that statement is now past tense, because at the beginning of February, I started getting recommended a plethora of clips from one specific show that really started picking up steam in the online sphere: Smiling Friends. At a certain point, my suggested tab will always wear me down, so I eventually gave in and clicked on one of the clips, especially when I saw that my favorite alcoholic, Mike Stacklasa, was in it. I was expecting some stupid Rick and Morty shenanigans, but instead I was greeted by a suicidal Mr. Plinkett delivering an existential monologue about happiness that completely blew me away. The thing that hooked me was that it didn't come off as overly cynical like most of these shows often do. It instead came off as a real person talking about the real effects of depression. Immediately after, I fell down a rabbit hole of clips from the show, and after about 30 minutes, I decided that I wanted to actually check it out. I discovered that it was on HBO Max, so I flipped on my TV and navigated over to the app. To my surprise and delight, the episodes were only approximately 10 minutes long, meaning that the entire season came in at 88 minutes in total. So in less than the time it would take for me to go see Channing Tatum go on a pointless journey of self-discovery with a dog, I would be able to watch the entirety of a season of television. There was no way that I could talk myself out of it, so I just went for it and watched the entire thing. Lo and behold, once I finished watching it, I was not disappointed in the slightest. Smiling Friends was really great. It was so different from what adult animation had programmed my brain to view it as, and it's the first show that I've watched in years that was actively able to hold my attention the entire way through. I do realize part of that is because of the length, but I truly believe that if the episodes were half an hour instead, I would feel the exact same way. I know this is a point that has been made a lot before, but it bears repeating that the lack of extreme cynicism was so refreshing. Adult animation has two general ways of making the viewer take itself seriously. The first way is through the humor that involves more mature themes, whether that be dark humor or foul language and sexual innuendos, like I mentioned earlier. The second way is through inserting pointlessly long and serious monologues at least once every episode. Seriously, if I have to see another clip of Rick Sanchez going on a tangent on how X-Emotion is pointless in my YouTube shorts with teenage boys in the comments saying, "Wow, that line really hit hard," I'm going to lose it. The problem with these shows is that they completely overlooked another way to make people value them as adult shows without all of the extremities, which is what makes Smiling Friends so unique. The answer is just to write up to your audience. Whenever I watch a Family Guy or a Rick and Morty episode, it's pretty easy to tell that Seth MacFarlane and Justin Roiland know that a large part of their demographic are teenagers and that they play into that. On the other side of the spectrum, Smiling Friends is literally a workplace comedy. Although a lot of the shenanigans that Charlie and Pim get themselves into are out there and fantastical, the characters are just normal people doing their everyday jobs. My favorite example of this is in an episode where the town gets taken over by a rival to Smiling Friends, aptly named Frowning Friends, to the point where even Alan and Gleb switch to the other company. When asked why they switched, instead of making a grand spectacle out of it, Alan says it's because they have a better 401k. Every teenager in the world knows cuss words, but it's hard to find someone who isn't financially responsible that knows what a 401k is. Sure, at the moment complete insanity is going on around them and it seems like a hate-filled mob is brewing, but everyone on screen, especially our main characters, still act like normal people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. In fact, once the Frowning Friends are exposed as frauds that actually care about things, the mob gathered outside immediately disperses, exhibiting the real-world topic of how fleeting sensationalism and the attention it draws can be in our modern culture. In a different adult animation show, we would likely see something more severe, like the crowd burning down the Frowning Friends building and brutally murdering the leaders. That doesn't happen, obviously. They're instead murdered by a group called the Renaissance Men, who come in on horses as a callback to a bit at the beginning of the episode, after which Pim and Charlie have a minute-long, passive-aggressive argument about. Instead of focusing on grandeur, adventures, or over-the-top comedy, Smiling Friends hones in on the small moments between all the chaos of everyday life, and I think that's a much more nuanced perspective that the genre rarely sees. When you're working, do you really remember the monotonous hours of whatever you're doing, or do you tend to remember that really weird and brief interaction that you had with your coworker during your lunch break? From my experience, the latter is true much more often than the former. Even though the world that we're being introduced to and the adventures we're seeing Charlie and Pim go on may seem remarkable to us, it's just their everyday life to them, and they treat it as such. In that way, the show is more conceptually adult than most that I have seen. Both Charlie and Pim are more everymen than a Peter Griffin or Homer Simpson could ever hope to be, as they have their moments of weakness and being inconsiderate, but they always come back around to normalcy rather quickly. In the Forest Adventure episode, as soon as Evil Pim sees someone impaled on a spear, he immediately snaps out of it and comes back down to reality. The humor is something that should also be touched on, as I think that it should also be commended as being rather subversive and sometimes mundane in a landscape of overbearing aggressiveness. Other than the constant jokes going on in the background of scenes and Zach Hadel's voice being one of the funniest things to exist ever, which are often touched on in discourse about Smiling Friends, I think that the absurdism of the show is also a key contributing factor. Once again, the thing that sets Smiling Friends apart from its peers is making its absurdity manifest itself in subtle ways that aren't constantly being harped on. Going back to that frowning friends scene I took a look at earlier, when Mr. Boss is holding up Grim and Gnarly at gunpoint and Grim starts crying and begging for his life, Mr. Boss says, "Relax, man, I was just gonna shoot you in the head and kill you." And Gnarly follows up with a, "Right, kinda cringe." There are these types of lines scattered everywhere through Smiling Friends, where someone will deliver a completely ridiculous statement with a stone-cold straight face. This works on multiple levels, as someone saying, "I actually wanted to kill the Puerto Ricans," as a response to a call for racial genocide in the tone of a disappointed child, is just so ridiculous it's funny. Adding on to that, it also works because these lines act as a microcosm of the entire show, maintaining normalcy in the face of the opposite. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we're all trying to do? We're trying to find a level of stability in a world, especially at the current moment, that has completely desensitized us to all of the craziness happening around us on a daily basis. In this bad land of insanity, I actually think it's great that Smiling Friends has been thrust into the world to counteract some of that insanity with Charlie and Pim's hijinks. It truly is an everyday miracle. Listen, I didn't know how to conclude this video, so I just forced the title in there because I'm in charge here and you can't stop me. Here's Kleb dancing for my outro. Okay, bye!